Right, what is tip number 2, please?
Tip number 2 is leave a legacy. So I'm going to talk about at a department level, but this would apply to anyone with responsibility, at key stage or even whole school. I had a colleague the other day, I don't know if this is a widely known analogy or one that she'd made up or something, but it was about airplanes and sort of going on a flight. She was saying every time you went on a flight with a different pilot, maybe from the same airline, there were different routines in place and different qualities of landing and different food, different ways of checking in. You'd be really annoyed and you'd be confused and you'd be livid. And same at the bank. If every cashier was different, and if you were seeing a cashier whose first day it was as opposed to whose 10th year it was, you'd want the same service. And companies are really, really good at doing that. You can't really pick out who the first person on their first day is and who's the most experienced person, because of all the systems and structures that they've got in place. My argument here is that this should be happening in our schools as well. I think too often we sort of allow our ECTs or our trainees to, we don't excuse what they're doing, but we don't put enough systems and structures in place at a higher level to allow them to shine. So I think schools should adopt this airplane company policy in some senses. And I think what I'm sort of broadly getting at is co-planning, is how it's been discussed. But I don't want to talk about co-planning. I want to take that one step further. I don't think co-planning goes far enough, just producing a set of resources. As a department, you need an aligned pedagogy. You need agreed routines. You need consistent methodologies. You need inbuilt accountability. You need knowledge of where that flexibility arises, so that you have a complete package, almost a brand, which I feel horrible saying. But as a leader of a department or of a school or of a key stage, the more structures you put in place, the more freedom you allow your teachers to have in focusing on what should matter, and you've taken care of the rest. So you should leave a legacy. And I think it's tough as a teacher, because the first time you sort of become a leader is the first time you're responsible for students that you're not in front of. Yeah. And no one really prepares you for that. Suddenly you're in charge of students whose names you don't even know. And it's a big leap. But what can you do that means they're getting the best out of you and your experiences and you as a leader? I think a way of thinking about this is, if you left your position and came back in 2 years' time, what evidence would there be that you had worked there? What have you put in place? Because I think as leaders of a school, one, you're entitled to do that, to leave a legacy. I'd argue maybe you're duty-bound to do that as well. You're not a manager where you go around and you cater for the whims of all your staff. You need to be leading them. And by reducing the variability within your department, I think you can really focus on and increase the quality within the department. I look back, I don't know about you, well, from the title of your book, I think I do know about you, but I look back at me teaching in my first few years and I'm like in horror. I wish someone had given me clear structures and clear routines, and I could spend my time thinking about, okay, how to implement them well, with a bit of extra space for some creativity and some original thought, but not worrying about what's every single minute of my lesson going to look like, and what routine should I use for this. But it wasn't even a routine. Whatever day of the week it was, I'd change whatever I was doing. It just didn't have enough headspace for me to do anything. I'd hate to see myself teach at the beginning of my career now. So I think it's about, as a leader, reduce the variability, but increase the quality. Focus on a few things. When you deliver CPD for your department, if you've said, we do this here, you can pinpoint a few real high leverage ideas to focus on. Staff should be talking about the same things within your department. I think I've worked in a few departments where an idea of what a great lesson was looked so different in each of our heads that we couldn't really talk about it properly. We were just clashing on, your kids were in silence for 10 minutes, what a monster you are. Well, your kids were throwing things out, but they were free and they were exploring things. There was no consistency around it at all, but a good leader should grab that, I think. I've not heard yet a good reason against doing this. and I would love you to play devil's advocate. The biggest things I've heard are, as an individual teacher, if I'm doing something better, I don't want someone telling me what to do. And that's fine. As a leader, it's not your job to be the best at everything, but it's to be the collator of what the best is. So if someone's doing something better, that should be shared and that should be your practice. And if it isn't better, they shouldn't be doing it. Another thing I've heard is if we've got all these things in place, it becomes too easy and people won't engage with it. They'll rock up to their lesson and they'll just download whatever you've got in place and they'll just sit back and relax. So, well, if they're going to do that, if that's their attitude, with no systems in place, they'll be doing something anyway. They'll be going onto TES the night before, finding the first thing they can and implementing it. At least if you've got structures as a department, you know what to hold them to account for. You know what you should be seeing. So you can say, as a department, we do this here, and you can really start having that conversation about not catching them out, but pushing them in the right direction, because you've got a real clear vision of what you are expecting. And then other people talk about stifling creativity, I think, when it comes to this as well. And as I mentioned it earlier, I disagree. The more things you put in place, the more structures you put in place, the more routines you put in place, teaching is hard. You have to think about a lot. The less you have to think about in your lesson, the more time you have to be creative and to be responsive and to have energy and to go home happy at night. And I just don't see why, as a leader, we aren't grabbing those things and saying, this is my brand. And it might annoy some people within your department, but I don't think it needs to be the case that every school is for every teacher. Not everyone's going to go work at Michaela and be happy. That's okay. If someone's not fitting into your brand and your culture and you've done what you can for them, you know, there'll be someone else and they'll find someone where they're happy and you'll find someone that's happier with you as well. I'll pause there.
This is great. I'm really, really pleased you brought this one up. So I've talked about this many a time in the past, that when I first started teaching, I think, looking back, I would have rejected somebody telling me this is how you should structure your lesson and so on. But looking back, I definitely needed it. I 100% definitely, because I was clueless, absolutely, just making stuff up as I went along, and again, taught a load of terrible lessons, and yeah, it took a long time for me to start to improve. So I agree with you, but let's just dive into this a little bit more. So you mentioned kind of some set routines, but also kind of room for flexibility. This is a terrible question and one that's very hard to answer, but what would be some of the almost kind of non-negotiables? I know that's a very loaded phrase, but if you're running a department, what are some of the things that you say, no, you know what, we do this way, versus some of the things where you can say, okay, this is where you have a bit of choice to play with? Is it easy to sort those out?
I think to a degree where you can all agree, probably school-wide, of what great looks like, you can. So I'm lucky in my job. I've got a trust lead for science and one for English as well. And you would often think that the three of us would find it hard to agree on what great teaching is, because you've got three very different subjects there. But at a zoomed-out level, we can all agree on when the teacher's modelling, as expert in the room, the kids should be listening. There should be some whole class assessment for learning going on, whether it's mini whiteboards, whether it's multiple choice questions, whether it's whatever. We should all agree that when the kids are working, most of the time it should probably be in silence, because we want them to ingrain it and then to think about it and then not to be distracted. I think there's loads that you can agree on, which has the danger of sounding oppressive and boring and all these things, but we're not here to cater to the whim of the teachers. We're here to give the students the best deal possible, and the evidence is pretty clear on what that is. I'm gutted. The way that I would have most fun in the classroom isn't what I know would be the best for my students. Sometimes I wish I was back in year one and we had these enriched problems and we were spending 60 minutes just having a great time. I was loving it, but it's quite hard to say now that it wasn't the best for them. And if I had some structures in place around what modelling looks like and what practice looks like, and a kid doing one thing once isn't enough, and if one kid in the classroom gives the right answer, you can't take that as proxy for the entire room. I think there's loads of things that you can agree on, and within one department, you will then find your own things that you choose to be non-negotiable. You might have a certain way, just for ease, that you want to set out your do now or your starter. You might want to have a last lesson, last week, last month, last year. It's not essential in every school, but it can be essential for you. I think that's okay. What was the question?
No, you've answered it. Just interested about what you would consider to be kind of non-negotiable versus where. So where would the flexibility come in? What areas of a lesson would you expect teachers to be doing different things?
I think great teaching is responsive teaching. And one that's responding before the lesson starts, because you know you've got these kids and it's this time of day and this is how the last few lessons have gone, and you need to cater it. If you are using co-planned resources, it shouldn't look the same in every single classroom, because they've gone on different journeys and you've got different kids in front of you, and I want to see flex there within the lesson where you've got your checks for understanding. Again, it shouldn't look the same everywhere. Teachers should be responding to whatever happens, so that's where things would look different. And I think also once all those things are in place, you could have the same lesson with the same pedagogical routines, and you could have 3 different teachers do it, and their personalities would shine because all their headspace around what they should be thinking about, or not what they should be thinking about, but around the lesson and the key content is done and ready, and they can be themselves for a little bit. And that's a bit of creativity as well, and a bit of freedom to express yourself and be who you are. I think creativity, it's in the name of the trust that I work for, Creative Education Trust, but it's less about it's less about in the moment things being wildly different, and I don't really know what I'm saying now. So what was the question? The question was, where does the flex come in? Where does the creativity come in? And I think also these things can happen from outside of the classroom, where you come up with an idea and then you share it around and you get that structure embedded as well. In terms of within the classroom, I don't think you need to be creative in the moment. I mean, there'll be times when a kid might throw up a misconception and you might find a quick way to deal with it. But again, by having everything else in place gives you that headspace to think about how to deal with that in the moment. I'd say that's quite creative. Other people might disagree, I don't know.
I'll tell you what, let me ask you 2 related questions just on this tip here. So the first is, one thing I see a lot when I visit schools is the classic kind of lethal mutation where, either SLT have decided or head of maths have decided every lesson starts with a do now, or every lesson has, silent modelling, or whatever it may be. And you look at these lessons and they are completely different, both in terms of how they look and also their effectiveness, because one person's, you say a do now, even if you specify it's got to be 4 questions from something kids have learned in the past, everybody here knows there's effective ways of doing that and less effective ways of doing that. Do you see this a lot? And this is the danger with the kind of prescribed, that you get these lethal mutations, or people latch onto a label of something, but it's not interpreted the way it's intended.
100%, and you're teeing up very nicely for tip number 3.
Oh, nice.
Which is all about how to deliver CPD to ensure that these things don't happen. So we'll
pause it. Perfect. That? Yeah, we'll leave that's kept listeners on. I like that. Well, let me ask you the final thing on this then. So if we're going down this kind of, for want of a better phrase, this kind of prescribed route where we've got these routines, I assume, perhaps I shouldn't assume, who are they coming from? Is it the head? Does it typically be the head of department? Is it the head of department and the TLR holders, more experienced teachers in the department? Is it a collaborative thing where it's let's all decide how our do-nows or whatever look like? Where does it work best?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and that's where being a good leader will come into play, around talking and being human and collating these things. And there's a mix there, because I said it earlier, you don't have to be the originator of all the best ideas. You should be open to some flexibility, but also there are some things that you've made your mind up about, because you've got that job for a reason, and what you say should go with some things. I used to hate departmental meetings where you get that phony sense of, right, we need a new routine for this. The head of the department's already decided what it's going to be and tries to guide everybody to say that and agree that. What about this? Which is on the next slide already. Well, I was just sort of handwriting things on posters. Fine. Well, let's go with that. And it will change moment by moment, and it will change thing by thing. And there'll be times when you just need to say, we are doing this. But always be open to someone else saying, I think I've got a better idea, or this won't work here, which is fine, and you need to do that. But don't waste people's time. You've got that job for a reason. And then there'll be times where you genuinely don't know, or the job is too big. Let's say you want to agree consistent methods for how to solve things in maths. You can delegate that to your team. You may have final say over it, but they can come up with ideas and give it to you, and 90% of them will probably make sense. So that will just come down to a case by case basis. But don't be afraid if you have come up with your idea, just to say it, because people will be grateful for it. Don't need to be patronised.
Fantastic.